What do you think of when I say woman's work? You might have some automatic thoughts giving you antiquated notions about the kind of work that women have traditionally engaged in. And I want to talk about one in particular today. Can you guess? It is knitting. And if you're a knitter, crocheter, weaver, or you work in textiles, you have a deep understanding of the experience of knitting, of textiles, as being calming, soothing. And now there is a preponderance of science to back this up. I'm going to tell you about some of the medical benefits of knitting for your brain health and also the psychology of pain management, and how architects are using the combination and patterns of knitting to strengthen their buildings. Welcome into the Modern Creative Woman podcast, where we are talking about the art and science of creativity. I'm Dr. Amy Backos. I'm an art therapist. I'm a psychologist. I've been doing this for over 3 decades. However, I've been knitting for over 5 decades. And the act of working with textiles has given me so many tremendous benefits. And for a long time, there was more qualitative research about this, the mental health benefits, the experiences that someone might have, the ability to shift their attention, etc. There was also information from my family that my grandmother knit during labor, and it was always recommended for women to knit if they could for pain management. Now the science is abundantly clear. I'm really excited to talk about this. It is often considered craft instead of art. It has been downgraded to a woman's work. And I'm going to give you some great examples of how art and craft overlap, and being able to use the creative part of your brain and the logical part of your brain gives you tremendous benefits, including protecting your brain from cognitive decline in older age, the physicality of knitting, and it's possible to knit into very old age. So let's get into this. Let's get this started. Let's start with the brain research. Knitting, crochet, textiles actually supports your brain. And there's research studies in Frontiers of Psychology. There's an incredible study from the Mayo Clinic following 1,300 knitters. And knitting improves some really important cognitive skills: memory, attention, and problem-solving skills. Regular knitting enhances these brain functions, such as switching tasks, right? Because you knit across a row and then maybe you do a different stitch on the way back. It requires you to follow a pattern, to shift when you need to shift, to anticipate what comes next. It requires cognitive flexibility, and that means being able to adjust if you make a mistake. So a lot of times you can have mistakes in your knitting and they don't show. You might have to do a little tinkering with it to disguise the mistake, or you can just leave it be, or you can figure out how to repair. And making those decisions to recognize that there is an error in the pattern and then make a decision about what to do with it requires this cognitive flexibility. Now, there's a lot of research showing that it helps reduce the risk of cognitive decline. And what they found in the Mayo Clinic study was that people were less likely to have mild cognitive decline, which is a precursor to Alzheimer's and dementia. And so people that are knitting are able to preserve their brain health and significantly less likely to have a cognitive problem later in life. What's the math, you might be wondering? it cuts your risk in half. 50% reduction when they compared people across matched pairs. It means, say, similar age or background or education, SES, health factors, all of those things are held in account. And they found that people who knit had 50% less likelihood to get the cognitive decline that is the beginning stages of Alzheimer's. Wow. This is an incredible finding from the Mayo Clinic, to be able to understand that this one simple task of knitting can have such a huge physical health benefit. So if you are not yet a knitter, I hope this convinces you. Considering the small investment that it would be for you financially and time-wise to take a series of knitting classes at a knit shop with other people on the same journey, consider that as a health investment. And it's practically the lowest cost preventative healthcare I can think of. Now, certainly you can spend a lot of money on different fibers, and the cost goes up as the kind of the rarity. Cashmere or Kiviat cost more than wool or cotton or synthetic. However, you can find yarn at great prices, and certainly the presence in a yarn shop gives you inspiration, color, stimulation, socialization, and that way that you can be involved in your community also contributes to your brain health. Because remember, socialization is one of the really important aspects of your health, being able to connect with others. If you are a knitter, you already know that knitting and crochet and working with textiles reduces stress and anxiety. And it's always been described by the people I know who work with textiles that they feel a sense of calm, like meditation or like if they're in a yoga class. And in fact, that's true. There's been some really great studies about that. Knitting lowers your heart rate and furthermore reduces cortisol. So if you've ever thought, I need to work on my stress levels, or doctors suggested that you should work on stress, this is a really great and easy way to do that. Now, many knitters think of the rhythm of knitting as a way to either zone out or to mindfully drop in. And the creation of opportunities for flow is so good for your brain. And there's research also that people who are able to get into flow are really improving their brain state. And the more you're able to drop into flow, the more easy it becomes. Flow has also been shown as an important tool for people who have neurodivergence. It gives a space internally, and we can all use that right about now. The mindfulness and meditative aspects of knitting is considered active meditation. I've talked a lot on this podcast about walking, in particular walking with friends, and it's similar to that. So knitting, it's a repetitive movement. There's only 2 stitches. Crochet, there's only a handful of stitches that you then vary, you change up. So it's hooking with the crochet or a knit stitch. Purl stitch is the same thing, just going the opposite direction. So there's studies that are showing knitters are able to better stay present. And that has this wonderful side effect of reducing our negative self-talk. It's a way to improve your emotional experience in the moment. Anxiety and depression has also been impacted by knitting and crochet. And these symptoms are helped by the process of knitting because it gives both a sense of calmness and a sense of purpose. There's ways that the knitting community have really been involved in caring for others. So knitting hats for people in need, blankets, new baby blankets for children just born in the hospital, in the NICU units. There's a study from University of Gothenburg shows that that's a huge part of the benefits, the sense of calm and purpose. One thing that's fabulous about knitting is it can be done long into old age. You don't even need to be able to see to knit. Knitting improves your hand-eye coordination, your dexterity, fine motor skills, and it's really helpful for recovering from injuries. It's been used as a occupational therapy. Repetitive hand movements can help maintain joint mobility. These are incredible benefits for knitting and crocheting. It's also been shown to lower your experience of pain. So pain psychology is about managing the experience of pain. And here's why it is always regulated into the psychology department, is that pain is perceived in the brain. You might have an injury in your foot, you stub your toe, but it's perceived in your brain. It takes a moment for you to recognize, oh, my toe hurts. Pain receptors are in your brain. And so pain psychology makes a whole lot of sense. And working with meditative textiles has a huge impact on one's perception of pain. So you still stubbed your toe, but you can perceive that experience in a little bit different way. So people experiencing chronic pain or kind of a long-term recovery that involves pain benefit from knit and crochet. There's also the cognitive benefits of a challenge, and following a pattern requires varying degrees of attention, and it requires quite a bit of attention to detail. Following along maybe a simple sweater design requires frequent measurement. It requires counting either on a piece of paper or on a little plastic knit counter. It's requiring your brain to engage in this really interesting way. It's a mental exercise and it's appropriate for all ages. It requires patience. And if you do these kinds of skills, you will understand that unknitting is part of the process. And I've heard it said so many times in so many ways. So if you're knitting, you're also unknitting. If you're crocheting, you're also unraveling, you're uncrocheting. And that kind of patience serves us a lot in life. There is a boost of dopamine that, to feel good, you finish a row, you finish untangling a mistake. There is this hormone that's involved that gives you pleasure. You're just sitting there doing your yarn project and you feel good, you feel better. Interaction with others. I already mentioned in the yarn shop, you can participate. There are so many ways that people engage. There's a website called Ravelry, and I was a beta tester on it, I think in 2008 I joined. It's a resource for patterns and community, and it lets you know the local events in your area. And if you are yet to get onto Ravelry, what are you waiting for? The kind of social ties that come from knitting with friends have a huge benefit. So these kinds of ties are based on, proximity. You get together with a friend or another knitter in the area, and then that special shared interest. And what's really great about knitting together is there's often long pauses in conversation, recognizing that someone is counting their stitches or reviewing their pattern. There's no pressure to speak, and I think there's a really big benefit in that the relationship can just be without pressure. We don't have to feel social anxiety because we're sitting there looking at our hands knitting. When we imagine what it might be like to knit, Your brain is starting to recall, say, the last knitting project, and it can soothe you. And so the ability to use your cognitive skills, build the cognitive reserves, and remember that's what exists, when you're fatigued, you still have some cognitive reserves. So recalling the pattern and memorizing a pattern, counting your rows, changing, shifting, making modifications so the sweater fits you and your body. All of that is engaging your brain, short-term memory, long-term memory, and the benefits are compounding. It really does build up over time. And there's not any difference between knitting and crochet. So crochet, repetitive, meditative stitches, same thing as knitting. Knitting is definitely something that's been with us for a really long time. And the estimate is knitting is about 1,000 to 2,000 years old. It's difficult for people to estimate because fabric decays over time. But the earliest physical artifacts that I could find in a search on the internet was socks, and they were found in Egypt, and the dating they estimated between 1000 and 1300 CE. And they had complex color work. They were really beautiful objects. Now, before knitting, there were other types of looping, stitching, again from the Middle East, and those are maybe 3rd to the 5th century CE. And of course, there's prehistoric evidence even before that. If you think about loops and stitching found in Turkey and Georgia, there's also similar weaving, and weaving's even older than all of this. I've been on a little bit of a mission to understand something more about physics. When I say more, I mean something. I took lots of biology. I took AP biology in high school and college. The science I took was more neuropsychology and brain dissection when I was getting my doctorate. And I did not ever take a physics class. So I'm learning now. But guess what? Knitting relates to physics. This was such an exciting find for me. The reason I'm interested in physics is my kid's going to study electrical engineering, and that is pretty much all physics classes. So fabricating engineering technologies relates to knitting. And because if you think of yarn, it's transforming this kind of one-dimensional bit of yarn, the string, into a two-dimensional fabric, like a sweater, and they're full of elastic movement. Not that there's necessarily elastic in the fiber, but they are built to stretch and expand. And when knitters are making a sweater to fit their body, they take measurements, they knit a practice swatch, they wash it, they lay it out to dry, they measure that, figure out how many stitches per inch, and then calculate the stitches for their body. If you are a knitter and you want to really be able to kind of have control over this, Elizabeth Zimmerman's books teach you how to do it. No muss, no fuss in how to do it. She just describes it and tells you how to do it. And I have lots of her stitch books, and Knitting Without Tears is one of them. And she's really laying out what we now understand about the mechanics of knitted material, which is really cool. There's a study in the School of Physics. The School of Physics is in Georgia Tech, and researchers there looked at simulations, and they were trying to be able to quantify and predict how knit fabric could be programmed into a computer. And they started kind of tinkering around for a mathematical theory of knitted materials to be able to calculate how much stretch, how much give. The hole at the top of your sweater for your neck is smaller than your head, but it stretches to fit over your head. And so they're already thinking of how this could be applied into engineering applications. And there's an incredible paper called Programming Mechanics in Knitted Materials in the Journal of Nature Communications. And these combinations of stretchiness have great practical application. And the paper also does a beautiful job thinking about how knit and crochet has been often dismissed as unskilled labor, as poorly paid labor, and as I mentioned earlier at the top of the show, quote unquote, woman's work. And properties of knits are very complex, and traditional engineering materials like maybe rubber or metal, knitting properties are considered more complex than that. This is really exciting to have a scientific application and understanding of textiles and how knitting transforms a string into a flexible shape. There's other knitters who have that mathematical mind and they create in sculptural ways, or they create patterns that are precise mathematical applications to really give you beautiful sweaters. Those unique fisherman sweaters were designed by women to be unique for the fishermen they were knitting for, and it identified them as, this is this person wearing this particular pattern. So there's, the advantage of being able to identify your person. So being able to decode the underlying principles of knitting at the Georgia Tech School of Physics, Elizabeth Matsumoto started looking at the elastic behavior of knitted fabrics. And it's really this nuanced interplay of the pattern, of geometry, of the yarn itself, the shape of the yarn, all the under and over crossings in a knot, and how it creates what she called emergent elastic behavior. And you can consider all the ways that this can be helpful in construction, building high-rises, bridges, allowing structures to be stable during earthquake or other kind of earth movement, wind, etc. The ability to be flexible works both for our mind and for construction materials to be able to withstand changing environmental situations. Let me know if you're a knitter or a crocheter, and if your answer is, yeah, I tried it and didn't get it, I have an answer to that in the research as well. Anxiety and depression lowers in knitters, but not at the beginning. It can cause an increase in your frustration. It can feel challenging if you are in the habit of perfectionistic thinking to learn a new skill, and to be in the experience as an adult where you are taking on a new learning process. We're not so often used to learning new things as adults. So if you tried and felt it was not for you, I want to encourage you to try again and consider knitting a full scarf, about 300 yards, and seeing how it goes, and allowing it to be misshapen. And, if you're going to wear a scarf around your neck, it doesn't matter if it's misshapen, it won't show around your neck. Perfection is not the goal. The goal is process and practicing in a way that you enjoy it. Remember, the health benefits are cumulative over time. I recorded this episode because just this week we had International Knit in Public Day. Did you see anyone knitting? So I want to give you a little push to engage in the fiber arts, and you can visit museums with textiles. I just saw an amazing show at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts in San Francisco. Beautiful weavings. You can Check out textile art also right now at the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco. It has been elevated to museum status, which is really exciting. I do not recall knitting or crochet showing up in that same way in museums. Weaving, yes. Textiles, rugs, wall hangings, and weavings have been long considered worthy of art museums. But now we're talking about what was once considered just a craft and just quote unquote women's work really is elevated into the museum status. And so participating in this kind of artwork is a really great way to kind of insulate yourself from the snobbery of quote unquote high art. And if you want to hear more about that, please be sure and have a listen to the previous episode. And it's about the male gaze, episode 161. Check out Ravelry for knitting patterns. But my strongest recommendation is go to a yarn shop and take a class. You can probably find something in your community if there's not a local yarn shop, but being able to knit with someone who can help you correct your errors instead of just watching a video, I highly recommend. All right, so let me know, what are you knitting? What are you crocheting? And I do hope that you will consider the incredible health benefits for such a small preventative investment in your time and money to learn how to knit and crochet. So now that you know, what will you create? Thank you so much for joining me here on the Modern Creative Woman podcast. As always, ad-free, thank you to the women who are sponsoring each episode. It's a $3 or a $5 donation. The link is in the show notes, and it offsets the cost of producing the podcast. It really helps. But one thing you can do that's absolutely free, drop in a 5-star review and forward an episode to a friend. That's how we make the show go. It's how we make the show grow. I look forward to speaking with you again in the next episode.